Today, we're going to continue reading Gloria's Way by Anne Cameron. The chapter is called Spunky's Obsession. Huey's dog Spunky always used to be glad to see us, especially Huey, but also Julian and Letitia and me. When he saw us, he'd get so happy he'd jump on us and lick our faces. We didn't mind. We kind of liked it. Then one day he jumped up on Mr. Bates. Mr. Bates was wearing his new white pants. Spunky wanted to lick Mr. Bates' face, but Mr. Bates was way too tall. And Mr. Bates was mad. Down, he growled like a big, angry wolf. Spunky didn't know the word down. He just stayed where he was, grinning at Mr. Bates. Mr. Bates shoved Spunky away. He tried to brush the paw prints off his pants. The paw prints wouldn't come off. Spunky hung his head. That jumping is not good, Mr. Bates said. We call it dancing, Huey said. Spunky can do it a long time. He likes to dance. Some people don't like to be danced with, Mr. Bates said, and I am one. Huey, you have to train that dog. How? Huey said. Teach simple commands, Mr. Bates said. Start with down, and after that, teach sit and stay. Mr. Bates got a box of doggy biscuits out of his truck. Just teach him one command at a time, he said. It might take him a whole day or more to learn one thing. When he does something right, he said, give him lots of praise and sometimes one of these. We'll help you, Huey, Julian said. We went into the Bates' backyard in the shade under the oak trees. Up in the branches, squirrels were playing. They looked happy not being trained. Letitia thought of how we could start training. We could show Spunky what the command down meant. She told Huey, Julian, and me down, and we laid down in the grass. Then we got up, and Letitia told us down again. We did it 5 times. Spunky sat and watched. His droopy velvet ears raised up when Letitia offered us doggy biscuits. We wouldn't take any. Spunky already knows that part, Julian said. Letitia put the biscuits away. Spunky's ears flopped back to normal. You saw what we did. Now you do it, Huey said to Spunky. Down, he added. Spunky looked at Huey. He didn't move. We're going to have to make him lie down, I said. We acted together. When Huey said down, Julian and I pushed on Spunky's rump, and Letitia pulled his front paws out from under him. Spunky went down with a soft thump. He looked surprised. Good dog, Huey said. We all petted Spunky. Spunky looked happy and banged his tail against the grass. He knew he'd done something right. He just wasn't sure what it was. A week went by. We repeated down to Spunky a lot of times, and finally, when he heard the word, he lay down by himself. And then we taught him sit and started on stay. It was when we got to stay that the squirrels made fun of him. When he stayed, they dropped acorns on his head. And they jeered, cha, 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 every time we said, good dog. We didn't know exactly what cha meant in squirrel language, except it sounded like an insult. Spunky thought it was an insult, too. When he heard cha, he started answering, woof, woof, woof. Then one afternoon, when he was laying in one place without moving just the way he was supposed to, a squirrel got more insulting. It came headfirst down the trunk of an oak tree and looked at Spunky. It raised its chin and said the loudest ch we'd ever heard. Spunky forgot stay. He jumped up and sprang against the oak tree. The squirrel sneaked just out of reach. "Cha!" it said again, and Spunky went crazy. He ran all around the tree trunk, jumping and barking. Then a lot more squirrels and high branches said "cha," and Spunky ran around with his nose in the air looking for them, shouting "Yerf!" all the time. We were calling, "Spunky, come and down and sit," but the only word Spunky listened to was "cha." Finally, he got really tired and lay down under the tree. Huey tried to talk to Spunky and get him to eat a doggy biscuit, but he wouldn't. He just stared up into the trees and whined. We ran into the house and told Mrs. Bates. She looked at Spunky out the kitchen window. "That dog doesn't even move," she marveled. "He is obsessed." "Obsessed? What does that mean?" Huey asked. "When a person can only think of just one thing and neglects everything else, that person is obsessed," Mrs. Bates explained. "I never heard of an obsessed dog before, but that's what Spunky is." "Maybe he wants to be Lord of the Jungle," I said. "Maybe so," Mrs. Bates said, "but poor fellow, he'll never make it." For a whole week, Spunky wouldn't listen to any commands or eat any doggy biscuits or move. We had to bring him his water bowl and his puppy chow. We sat under the oak tree till he had worn a bare place in the grass, listening to "cha, cha," and barking back "yerf" until he was hoarse. By Saturday, Mr. Bates decided Spunky's condition was serious. "I thought he would get over this," Mr. Bates said, "but he hasn't. Maybe he needs a change of scene." "We tried to move him, but he won't move," Huey said. "He will if you put his choke collar and his leash on him and pull," Mr. Bates said. So we did. Spunky didn't want to go anywhere, but when the collar got too tight, he had to. We half walked him, half dragged him down the sidewalk. His eyes looked like muddy marbles, and he kept looking back toward home. We got him to the park and rested near the river where the bank is high and steep. Huey loosened Spunky's collar. Spunky made a little snorting sound. He sniffed the air. He pushed a dandelion with his nose and ate a piece of grass. His eyes started to get little sparks of life in them. "I think we can let him free," I said. "I think he is forgetting his obsession." Huey took his leash and collar off. Spunky wagged his tail and "cha!" There was a squirrel between us and the river, sitting up and holding a nut in his front paws. Spunky didn't even say "yerp." He just sprang. The squirrel ran. "Oh no!" Latasha yelled. "He's going to get this one." The squirrel ran fast, but Spunky ran faster. They raced to the river. Just when it looked like Spunky would catch him for sure, the squirrel dodged to a willow tree. Spunky didn't make the turn. Kerplash! We ran. Spunky was swimming in circles under the willow tree. His ears floated beside him like little boats. The squirrel was out on a branch over Spunky's head, saying "cha." Whenever Spunky could get his breath, he was saying "yerf" like crazy. "Spunky's obsessed again," Huey said. "Worse than ever," Julian said. We watched. Spunky kept swimming round and round. The squirrel crept his way out along a willow branch. He made the branch bounce with every "cha." "Spunky!" Huey called. Spunky paid no attention. He looked like a robot dog. "Maybe he doesn't even know what land is anymore," Letitia said. "Maybe he's forgotten." "I'll get him. I'll make him remember," I said. I pulled off my shoes and socks. I rolled up my pant legs. I jumped down the bank and waded into the river. Spunky's eyes looked like marbles again. and his front legs turned like egg beaters. I grabbed them high up near his chest. Spunky, life is more than squirrels, I shouted, and then I pulled him to shore, and Huey and Julian hauled him up onto the riverbank, and Spunky flopped down on the grass. He panted as if he would never get enough air. Spunky, remember me? I'm Huey, Huey said, and Spunky licked his hand. Ch, said the squirrel in the willow tree. Don't listen, Huey begged. Don't let a squirrel's mind mess up your mind, I said. Spunky didn't look for the squirrel. He acted like he didn't even hear it. Then he stood and shook himself hard and sprayed water all over us. We backed away. He shook himself off some more as if he was shaking Squirrel out of his hair forever. That one tricked you, didn't he? I said. You found out you aren't king of the jungle, didn't you? Spunky whined and licked my hand. Do you remember anything from before, Spunky? Letitia asked. Like, down? Spunky looked blank. Down, Spunky, Huey said, and slowly Spunky lay down in the grass. Stay, Spunky, Huey said. We tiptoed away. Spunky stayed right where he was. Good dog, Huey said. Come, Spunky. Huey clapped his hands and Spunky ran to us. His eyes looked golden again. Good, good, good dog, we said, and Spunky was so happy that he jumped for joy and licked our faces. He stood on his hind legs and put big wet paws around Huey. He danced with Huey, and then he danced with all of us, just the way he used to. We didn't even think about dancing not being a command or care about his paw print on our clothes. The end.